Count Magnus? Are you asleep, Count Magnus? I stood in the shadow of Rawbeck Hall, home to the distinguished De la Gardie family. I planned to pen my next travel book on Scandinavia, and I had most generously been given access to all parts of the De la Gardie family home and estates in Sweden. According to the family letters and other documents, which I had kindly been given permission to peruse in the course of my studies, the most notorious member of the family, Count Magnus de la Gardie, was a most cruel fellow, with a keen interest in matters alchemical and occult. There were distressing accounts, not only of floggings and even brandings meted out to his tenants for the most trifling of offences against punctuality, but also, scarce credible, of men burnt alive with their families in homes the land of which adjoined the Count's own. Rumour had it that the Count had made the Black Pilgrimage to the ruined Galilean city of Chorazin, in which, so prophecy would have it, the Antichrist was to be born. It was widely believed that he had brought back with him from his travels someone or something, but as to the nature of this companion, I could discover nothing. There was also a library, to which I was given unrestricted access, and which proved to contain many fascinating papers dating back several centuries. If any man desires to obtain a long life, if he would obtain a faithful messenger and see the blood of his enemies. Oh. I was staying at a local inn, and Rawbeck House was but a short walk away, in the course of which I should have to pass the church and its adjoining mausoleum, which contained the remains of the Count. This mausoleum was a quaint, 8-sided building built at the eastern end of the north aisle. The ceiling of the church was adorned with a most hideous Last Judgment, full of lurid flames, falling cities, burning ships, crying souls, and ghastly grinning demons. It reminded me of a tale the innkeeper had told me the previous night. The Count had been dead 100 years or so when 2 local men decided to poach on his land, despite warnings that they would meet with persons walking who should not be walking. The screams were so loud as to be clearly audible in the village below, and the next day a small party was sent out to recover them. What the fellows in the search party found was so shocking that they would never speak of it again. One poacher was still alive, but stood rooted to the spot, his back to a tree trunk, seemingly trying to push away an unseen assailant. The other, quite dead, had all the flesh stripped from his face, so that his eyes could not be closed, for there were no lids with which to close them. The survivor died within the week, and soon it was whispered that the Count had claimed another 2 victims. That night I had the most terrifying and astonishing dream. Daylight. Thank goodness. Oh. The next day, we visited the mausoleum. The interior was surprisingly well lit, and the central space was occupied by 3 sarcophagi. 2 of these bore a large crucifix upon the lid, but the third had none, only a full-length effigy. But it was the scenes engraved around this effigy that were so strange. So very strange. Ah, this must be the Count's mysterious companion. My goodness! What is this? Only one padlock is secure. I tried to close the 2 padlocks, unsuccessfully. I bid good night to the Count and made my way back to the inn. The next few days were spent scouring the family records, most pleasant. But I found myself suffering from a strange compulsion to visit the Count once more. I resolved to call upon him one last time on my way back to the inn in the evening. I had, you should understand, received an urgent letter requesting my immediate return to England. Ah, Count Magnus, we meet for the last time. But what is this? My goodness! How on earth? What is this I have done? The next day, I began my journey back to England. I put last night's terror to the back of my mind, but I could not rid myself of the idea that I had not locked the door behind me. The voyage by steamer was comfortable enough, yet I could have sworn that I kept glimpsing 2 odd figures. One tall and cloaked with a broad-brimmed hat, the other short and shrouded in some dark, hooded garment. They had an air of familiarity about them, but perhaps my mind was playing tricks. I landed at Harwich, where I took a carriage. It was at about 9 o'clock that we approached the village of Belsham St. Paul. We came to a crossroad, and I saw them again. I am being toyed with, I fear. I find myself in decent lodgings. I am to be quite comfortable. They are closer now. What's that on the stair? Count Magnus! You have found me! Oh no! I beg you! Are you awake, Count Magnus?
It was December. The easterly wind lashed at my face. I was lost. Snow began to fall and covered a bleak landscape with a blanket of ice. Darkness descended as I approached a crossroads. I would not have known it but for a crooked wooden sign. I longed to lie down and ease my aching bones. But in this weather, I would surely die. What is that? Dear God, I am saved. But nobody was there. As disappointment crept across my face, I resolved myself to continuing my journey. Where was I going? I could not say, I could not see. But through the dark I noticed a flickering light. The light grew brighter as it approached. An elderly man carrying a lantern. My rescue. He kindly agreed to put me up for the night, putting my thoughts of perishing to rest. He led me to his modest home, and my heart leapt at the sight of a roaring fire. We pulled our chairs close to the hearth, and the gentleman told me about his life as the fire thawed the frost from my fingers. His sad tale was one of self-imposed exile and humiliation. I realized his only company were the tools of his trade, which lined the dusty shelves. He seemed to forget I was sitting beside him as he mused on philosophies and scientific speculations. His voice dripped with despair as he told me of his loneliness. Growing uncomfortable with such intimacy, I walked to the window and sighed with relief to realize the snow had stopped falling. I informed my host I would be on my way. The elderly man told me I was foolish to attempt the 20-mile walk back to my lodgings in Dwolding. Yet my heart yearned to see my wife again, to feel the warmth and security of her embrace. Her heart would be breaking with terror and suspense that I had not yet returned from my travels.
Be careful,
my host warned.
The road is deadly. 9 years ago there was a terrible accident. 6 lives were lost on a treacherous night, just like this. The overnight mail coach slipped on the broken parapet and plunged into the valley below. None of the travellers survived.
Once again we drank in the silence of the cold and barren landscape. The journey to the crossroads seemed swift by comparison, and soon it was time for me to part with my host. I thanked him for his hospitality as we parted. I walked on alone, convinced I was lost, when through the darkness I saw the unmistakable lights of an approaching coach. The coach moved without sound, the snow cloaking the hooves of the horses, their hot breaths steaming from their flared nostrils like a locomotive. The coach glided past me, and I feared that the coachman hadn't seen me. I opened my mouth to cry out as the coach came to a standstill. I ran toward the vehicle and embarked. Though impossible, it felt colder inside the coach than outside in the fresh air. I had 3 fellow passengers, but none of them turned to acknowledge me, rather too lost in their own thoughts and stories. I became aware of a terrible stench that created a rising sickness within me. I carefully tried to open the window, but the leather strap broke off in my hand. As my eyes grew accustomed to the dark, I was able to fully appreciate my surroundings. The frayed and rotting fabric, mildew on the glass, rotten planks of wood crumbled beneath my feet, exposing the snow-covered track beneath the carriage. I gasped with horror, but my fellow passengers remained still and silent. The gentleman sitting opposite slowly raised his head, moonlight illuminating his pale, waxy skin, the dew of the grave in his hair. A corpse. The 2 other passengers turned to me, the only life burning from their empty eye sockets. Darkness. I slowly blinked open my eyes and rejoiced as I recognized my dear wife at my side. I was alive. We were together, and that was all that mattered. I had been found by 2 shepherds on a snowdrift. It had saved me from dashing on the rocks. They had dragged me to the village and summoned my wife from the address in my wallet. As I stared into my wife's eyes, I thanked God for my survival. Last night, I had been the 4th passenger in that phantom coach.
My dear Robert, this is a curious letter to be writing, for I am truly at a loss. I sit here on Boxing Day, far from you and your family, and sad that I was obliged to decline your kind invitation to spend Christmas Day at your festive board. Now I am alone, perhaps I can tell you a little more about the disappearance of Uncle Henry. The facts are these. On Friday the 19th, he went, as usual, shortly before 5 o'clock, to read evening prayers at the church, and when they were over, set off to pay a visit to a sick person in a cottage some 2 miles away. He paid the visit and started on his return journey at about 6:30. This is the last that is known of him. poor Mrs. Hunt, his housekeeper of many years' standing, is quite overcome. And it is to be presumed that our poor uncle was attacked on his way home by persons unknown. Perhaps his assailants thought he was carrying money. The Bow Street men say they have found no clue and have left the town. This evening I had company in the shape of a bagman. He had been on the roads for some days about here, but had nothing to tell of any suspicious characters, although he was very full of a capital Punch and Judy show, with the most wonderful Toby dog. He advised me to be sure not to miss it, if it should come to town. My reason for telling you all this relates to a dream, sir, which I am going to record, and I must say it is one of the oddest I have had. I crave your patience in this, for it seems to hint at some explanation for the dramatic conclusion of my story. It began with what I can only describe as a pulling aside of curtains, and I found myself seated in some ill-defined space. There were people on either side of me. They never spoke, and were all grave and pale-faced and staring fixedly ahead.
Hello, boys and girls. Let's play a trick on old Dewey, eh? Dewey! Oh, Dewey! Where are you? That's the way to do it! Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear! Poor Dewey! Oh, look! There's Judy with the baby! Hello, look out, baby! Ooh, goo, goo. Looking after baby! Coo, coo, coo! Oh no! Mr. Punch! Oh no! Ow! 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 Oh, Mr. Punch!
There is a reason why I'm telling you this, Robert. The body has been found. It was surely the strangest Christmas day that ever I spent. I was settling down to read the latest number of the Pickwick when I noticed a commotion in the marketplace outside my window. It was a Punch and Judy show. And I can tell you it gave me quite a shiver, and not entirely one of delight, due, doubtless in part, to my dream of the night before. The names of the two proprietors on the booth, however, were Italian, not the English ones of my dream. This time, the Toby dog was there, and I was able to watch the proceedings from my window. The play began, and it seemed the whole of Bicester must be in attendance. My newfound squeamishness abating, I laughed heartily as Mr. Punch dealt with his adversaries, even when he did away with the baby. Finally, the hangman came to punish the guilty fellow. But I could see something amiss from my vantage point that the audience could not. There slowly rose, for a few seconds, an uncovered face, with an expression of terror upon it. The showman himself was being forcibly lifted towards his own gibbet. Behind him, in the gloom of the booth, I could just make out someone's head shrouded in a hood like the one a hangman places on a condemned felon. Everybody gave chase. I followed, albeit at a slightly slower pace. It happened in a chalk pit. The man went over the edge quite blindly and broke his neck. We searched everywhere for the other, until he too was found dead beneath the overturned showbox. But it was in the chalk pit that the body of poor Uncle Henry was found, with a sack over the head and the throat horribly mangled. I cannot bring myself to write in greater detail. I forgot to say that the men's real names were Kidman and Gallop. No one here seems to know anything about them, but it is my belief that they have received just such punishment as they deserved for the murder of Uncle Henry. I am coming to you as soon as I can after the funeral. I must tell you when we meet what I think of it all.
It is very singular. People are always asking if anyone has ever seen a ghost. I have. The Kamchatka was one of my favourite ships. I say was because she no longer is. Those of us who cross the pond with regularity do not take voyages of this length lightly, and many sailors will wait for their favourite ships before making passage. 105, if you please. The steward took my portmanteau. A strange expression came over his face. He muttered under his breath and led me below deck to 105 on the port side. The steward deposited my things, and seeing he was anxious to leave, I pressed 3 coins in his hand before he scurried off to his other duties. We left punctually, the motion of the steamer providing a refreshing breeze in the warm and sultry weather. The usual sights took my interest. Passengers paced the deck, staring at each other, and the odd chance meeting of friends who didn't know the other was on board. That night I turned in early. To my surprise and dismay, I discovered I had a roommate for the duration of the passage. The threadbare curtains were almost pulled, revealing his possessions neatly laid out. What on earth? Good Lord, the room was freezing. It was as if I was out in the open air. Poor fellow. He must be seasick, and I was in the worst place for it on the lower berth. I closed my eyes and dozed until daybreak. The next morning, I dressed hurriedly, keen to avoid my roommate, and rushed out onto deck. There, the ship's doctor was grabbing a breath of fresh air himself. "Fine morning," he greeted me. "Indeed," said I, despite the damp in my room that has rather chilled me to the bone. "Damp?" he exclaimed. "That's unusual. Whereabouts are you?" 105. The same look that took the steward now passed over the doctor's face. I shall complain, and to add to that, I have a deuce of a roommate that takes to bolting out of bed in the middle of the night, leaving the porthole wide open. "Look," said the doctor, "I don't wish to alarm you, but the last 3 people to have slept in 105 have all gone overboard. Share my room with me, though I don't know you from Adam. It would be my pleasure to see you away from that room." The last thing I wanted was to make a fuss, and however silly it seemed, I didn't doubt the sincerity of the good doctor. I decided I would stay put for the time being and return to my quarters. My roommate must have returned. His curtains were tightly pulled shut. Later that day, the captain came to find me, asking the whereabouts of my companion, fearing he had followed the others overboard.
"Good afternoon, sir. We seem to be missing your room."
Again, I declined the offer of another cabin. Now I would have the stateroom to myself. On the second night, I had just drifted off to sleep. I was badly bruised, and that wretched porthole was wide open. To add insult to injury, I would be a crown poorer. I had placed a bet with the steward. He said no man could keep the porthole shut all night, and now he was proved right. I was not alone. Someone, or something, was in the upper berth. I returned to my room expecting it to be awash with icy seawater, but to my disappointment, the bedding was dry. There is something wrong with that place. I have been frightened half to death. "I can tell," said the captain. "Change your mind about sharing with the doctor?" "Will you help me?" I asked. "I will, though it is not in my expertise to meddle with ghostly things." I refused to believe I had seen a ghost. Together we set the room, I closed the porthole, and he jammed the door shut. If we see anything now, it is our imagination or something supernatural. We both sat on the lower berth, our eyes glued to the porthole. They all jumped to their death from the stern of the ship, a horrified look on each of their faces as if they were running from the devil. The stench of rancid, salty water filled our nostrils. "I saw something. Don't let it escape." It was gone, and miraculously we were alive. Well, do you want to hear more? There is nothing more. That is the end of my story. If you take passage on the Kamchatka, you will find a different captain, and cabin 105 permanently engaged. Engaged by that dead thing.
I bequeath to my only living relative, Mr. John Humphreys, Willsthorpe Hall and its surrounding estate, including the Willsthorpe Maze.
I was on my way back to my new home. I never knew my uncle, Mr. James Wilson, but he had left me his entire estate. My agent, Mr. Cooper, had taken a great delight in showing me the grounds, which included a fine replica temple and, rather more interestingly, a yew maze. Secretum meum mihi et filiis domus mei. My secret is for me and the sons of my house. Well, that would apply to me. I wonder what Uncle Wilson's secret could be. I very quickly found myself at the centre. Oh. The engravings on this metal globe are really very odd. This must be Cain. Yes. And Kore. Ah, yes, and the slaughter of Absalom. An assemblage of the patriarchs of evil, perhaps not uninfluenced by a study of Dante. Who could that be? I say? Hello? Mr. Cooper? Come out, I say! Mr. Cooper?
Ah, Mr. Humphreys, I've got these chaps waiting here to give me an hand clearing out the maze for you.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Cooper. Please do as much as you can.
Oh, blimey, that holds the heat.
Odd. This part of the maze gets no sun all day long. Perhaps you are of a hot temperament, Mr. Cooper.
Perhaps you're right, sir.
The next day, I had the pleasure of showing Mrs. and Miss Cooper the newly cleared walkways. Embarrassingly enough, I could not find my way to the centre. In the end, we had to give up and went back to the house for tea. As we approached the house, I noticed something I had never observed before. A yew tree by the window to the dining room. It had the unmistakable form of a man reaching toward the window. How very curious. I spent the remainder of the evening in Uncle Wilson's library. I came across a rather interesting collection of sermons and meditations concerning a man who'd journeyed into a maze to uncover a precious jewel and was never seen again more. Oh, how very appropriate. At the centre of this labyrinth there was a jewel of such price and rarity that would enrich the finder thereof for his life. When there fell a stillness again, he distinguished a trampling of running feet coming very close behind him, wherewith he was so daunted that he continued to run until the dawn broke. A more dreadful night was never spent by mortal creature than that he had endured in that labyrinth.
Oh, the pains he had suffered.
Welcome, fellow brothers of Cain. One of you has been chosen. Step forward, Wilson.
Oh, my goodness! What a thought! Oh. I took myself to bed. In the morning, Lady Wardrop, a local curator of mazes, would be dropping by. Ah, Mr. Humphreys, so good of you to see me. At last I shall glimpse the Willsthorpe maze with my own eyes. A happy, happy day. Lady Wardrop seemed delighted as we made a thorough exploration. I wondered why my uncle had refused her visitation. She led the way. This one, she already knew, must date from around 1780. The globe, moreover, completely absorbed her. Oh, I should like a rubbing of that if it could possibly be made. I shouldn't like to take any liberties here. Don't you feel that a watch is being kept on us, and that if we overstepped the mark in any way there would be, well, a pounce? I can't say that I... My dear Mr. Humphreys, I'm not sure that I shan't forgive you if I find next spring that maze has been grubbed up. I had promised her a sketched plan of the maze by the next day, which I sat down to complete that evening. Oh, drat! But what in the name of... Before me, there appeared a hole. A hole that seemed to go through the paper and desk, through to the floor below. I stared into an infinite abyss! Oh! Mr. Cooper summoned the doctor, and I was confined to my bed to rest. In the final clearing of the maze, the globe was broken. Its contents? Ashes, which one could assume were the final remains of my uncle, James Wilson.
Jack will show you to your room. I have given you the room in the tower.
There she was again, that voice, coming to me night after night. A voice that had haunted me on and off for longer than I can care to remember. Every night, I'd close my eyes and be back at that house. I'd arrive just as tea was ready to be served. I would always be greeted by the same group of somber figures. The air was stifling hot, and my friend, Jack, stood there at the back behind his mother, Julia Stone, glaring at me.
Jack will show you to your room. I have given you the room in the tower.
My heart sank. Dread crept over me, and I could not say why. What terror was waiting for me? Your room, friend. As the years passed, I had gotten to know the house quite well. There was a smoking room, always so dark. There was a figure there too, always hiding in the shadows, watching me. I could never figure out who it was. Marriage and death would leave its indelible mark on the family. Jack, once a strong young man, no more. And Mrs. Stone.
Jack will show you to your room. I have given you the room in the tower.
It had been 6 months since I'd last had the dream, and this time there was one figure noticeable by her absence.
Jack will show you to your room. I have given you the room in the tower.
The next summer, I was at my lodgings in London, when my dear friend John called in to collect me. Together we took the 11:45 from Victoria to visit his family home in the country. No, it can't be. The house was the same, but this time, friendly faces greeted me.
Ah, Oliver, such a pleasure. We've heard so much about you. You must make yourself at home. John will show you to your room. I have given you the room in the tower.
There is something terrible in that room. I looked around the room I had never seen. On the wall opposite my bed was a huge painting. A face I recognised. Julia Stone was as I remembered her, emanating evil. It was a self-portrait. There was no way I would sleep with that abomination in my room, so together, John and I removed the painting. In doing so, I cut my hand, or seemed to. Blood. There was no cut or injury. Poor puss. He sees something that he both hates and fears. I wonder, what does he see? With the portrait in the hallway outside, my room held no terror for me. I felt I could have slept where I sat. I was so overcome with fatigue. I do not know how long I had been asleep when... The portrait. But how? I was not alone.
I have been long waiting for you. Tonight I shall feast. Before long, we will feast together.
Look! The painting! I'm not sure if John quite believed me, but there was only one ending for that dreadful picture. Julia Stone was no more. Never again would she visit the room in the tower.
Gentlemen, when you have finally passed the port for the last time, I wonder if I might regale you with a tale set within the confines of these very walls, which I have compiled from a series of diaries found in the attic of the house. Whitminster has a Bluebeard's chamberer, a jack-in-the-box, if you will, awaiting some future occupant of the house. The Diary of Dr. Ashton, December the 13th, 1730. Dr. and Mrs. Ashton had no children of their own, and had taken into their care a young orphan boy by the name of Frank. More recently, they had also taken in the son of an old friend, the Earl of Kildonan, who was travelling overseas. The boy's father felt him unfit to make the voyage. "Not that he is sickly," the Earl wrote, "but that he is given to moping about in our raths and graveyards, and he brings home romances that fright my servants out of their wits." It was a Friday, and Mrs. Ashton's black cockerel had gone missing. She sent the boys to look for it, but all that could be recovered were a few black, charred feathers. Abominable! Abominable! Keep them off! Keep them off! Oh, help me! Help me! Keep them off! Dr. Ashton, having his suspicions, questioned Saul, who explained that young Frank had taken fright from a game they had both been playing. That night, Dr. and Mrs. Ashton sat at Frank's side. A sickness, a fever had taken hold of him. "I am afraid for my Lord Saul. I am afraid he will be very cold. I am free of them now. Oh, I am sorry about your black cockerel, Mrs. Ashton, but he said we must use it so if we were to see all that could be seen." Whatever had taken Frank had come back for Lord Saul. Judging from later entries, Dr. and Mrs. Ashton lived on undisturbed into their old age, for there are no further records of anything out of the ordinary. Over 70 years had passed, and the house welcomed in its new residents. Dr. Olds, his niece Mary, their housekeeper Mrs. Maple, and various servants in her charge. Mrs. Maple was having a terrible problem with a sawfly infestation in the room adjoining the doctor's.
So many sawflies! Such terrors!
During her cleaning of the house, she found an unusual glass tablet, which the good doctor thought might be of interest to Mary. She duly studied it, but was not prepared for what she saw next. Mary could not believe her eyes, yet could not tear them away. The only way in which she could calm her nerves was to record her experience in her journal for a good friend of hers.
My dearest Emily, my hand is trembling as I write this, but I must keep record of it. Do not ask me how, what I saw. It was in a glass tablet found on the grounds. I found myself transfixed, mesmerised, as a vision appeared before me in the glass. I saw two boys in the grounds of the house. An old crone, she put something glittering in the youngest hand, the same glass tablet, and gave instructions to something terrible. And then, in the view from my very bedroom window, I saw a sacrifice. Blood and burned feathers on the ground. The eldest, a pale youth, it was horrible. He called them and they came for him. Hideous creatures, crouching low at first and then swift like hounds from hell. The pale boy ran to the door of this very house, and these creatures, they tore the flesh from his skin. My dear Emily, by some terrible miracle, I have been the unwilling witness to some episode of tragedy connected to this very house.
Later that night, Dr. Olds had finished in his study and was heading for his bedroom. It was pitch black, and his room was the farthest away. He passed through the hallway and found himself outside the infested room. The door was open, and he could hear something rustling in the dark. Dr. Olds wouldn't tell Mary what had happened to him. His only words were, "Tomorrow! Tomorrow!" She put him to bed and then made her way back to her own room, where she slept uneasily, plagued by terrible dreams. The next day, another attempt was made to clear out the infested room. The doctor still would not say what had happened to him in the night. In the daytime it was a very well-lit room, though perhaps not a very airy one. The principal piece of furniture was a gaunt old press of dark wood, locked, and incidentally the resting place of the papers from which I have distilled my tale. Mrs. Maple? Mrs. Maple? Dr. Olds called for Mrs. Maple and asked for the keys with which to unlock the press.
Oh, bless my... No, that was that... I can't pronounce me.
Mrs. Maple spoke at great length, a habit of hers, about the house's previous occupants, and of how Lord Saul, to whom the press and contents had belonged, had met his somewhat macabre end. For one so young, he had quite a mysterious reputation, being often seen to creep about at night, peering in at the windows. It was believed he was not alone. It was whispered, and it still is, that on lonely winter nights, when the fires blaze, his lonely, thin ghost flutters at the window.
100 years or more ago, and that was in the time of Dr. Ashton, and was a very fine gentleman.
Mrs. Maple's meandering train of thought having finally allowed her to recall the resting place of the keys, the decision was made to move Lord Saul's last remaining possessions to the attic, where they were shut up, never to be exhumed. Until now, that is. Whitminster does indeed have a Bluebeard's chamber, a jack-in-the-box, awaiting some future occupant of the house. What is that? Tapping, rustling at the glass.
I see it.
What on earth?
I see it at the window. James is perfectly correct.
Frank!
It's real. Good Lord. I'm so cold. So very cold.
Them that was with him would strip the skin, leaving an ugly, thin ghost.